Okay, good call on that.
Yeah.
To pick up there. So, been able to use those municipal relationships with communities, specifically in rural Iowa, to determine some additional needs that they have outside of your standard engineering services. So, we've used those needs that they have to create a community development group. Clinton is part of that, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what they do for some of those communities.
Great. Thank you, Justin. So, again, my name is Clint Sloss. My background is in city planning and economic development. I've been doing this type of work for the past decade or more. And as part of our community development team, we go into a lot of communities for a number of reasons, trying to address primarily quality of life challenges in the communities. And regardless of whatever that first conversation is, housing always comes up as one of the top issues in any community, from workforce needs or just trying to accommodate seniors growing out of their large single-family home. So we've really focused the last probably 3 years really on how do we approach rural housing development, how do we bring tools that are more of the traditional tools and use them differently or more creatively to approach this challenge, and then working with a lot of our development partners throughout the Midwest to try to bring them to these communities and help create some housing opportunities. So with that, we've seen the past 2 years, especially with COVID, that there's a lot of articles focusing on the housing need. It's not just in large metro cities, but also in rural communities. It's really been kind of a quiet or silent issue that no one's talked about until COVID really has hit. And so we continue to see more and more of these articles, as well as the topic of livability in rural communities. Broadband is a big issue. We know that in Iowa we have some really great initiatives that have been enacted over the last year. I believe there's $200 million that have been given out to different telecoms to help support rural connectivity. So that's great. It's a way to help support these rural housing opportunities and just economic development in rural communities. But again, that's really ties back to housing need as well. The affordability factor is also really important here. On this chart, you can see in red is the median household income from 1960 to 2017 when this study was done. The blue is the median house price, showing that it's going up, up, up. The yellow is the median rent price, which is kind of in between the income and the house price. But as you can see, those prices for both rental and owner-occupied housing has continued to go up over the last 50 to 60 years, while our median household incomes have been relatively stagnant. So again, that kind of compounds the issue of how do we provide housing that can meet the market where it is. So one of the things we do primarily in our communities is talk about what are those housing challenges that you face. And I'm going to go through kind of a handful of ones that I'm sure you can relate to, you've seen in maybe some of your communities that you work in or live in. The first being just the stock that's available doesn't really meet the need of the community. A lot of times you go into some of our rural communities and they say we need modern rentals. Some places haven't seen new rental opportunities built in 30 or 40 years. Really because the market hasn't really allowed for it to happen. There hasn't been enough of a return for that builder, developer, whatever you want to call them, to come in and build that, or even a local person to see that return. So that's really one of the first things we hear. Single-family homes that are mid-range price, a target price, a lot of communities tell us, is $100,000 to $180,000. That's for existing homes. We know that any new home under $250,000 is very difficult without some substantial subsidy attached to it. And then the last being, again, the active adult or senior housing options, trying to help transition seniors from their large homes down to something more manageable, something that maybe is maintenance-free, that can help them still be independent and live in their community, while also opening up opportunities for families to move in and others into those single-family homes. Number two is really that barrier to developers and investors. Again, the cost to build may not always equal the return on investment that you would see maybe in a metro community. Some of those costs where you see land is much more affordable in rural communities, within the community as well as on the fringe, but when you have to pull trades into the area to actually complete the work, or if you are a developer that is choosing between building in a rural community versus a metro, there's the trade-offs, can be substantial for going to a rural community. So how do we, again, find that right mix in those tools? And again, I wanted to show just an example of, this is a home that sold in Orange City, Iowa for $250,000. We're doing some work up there in Sioux Center. This is a home that is more or less a typical new build. Anymore is now kind of the entry point for most homes, kind of 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Just wanted to show that as an example that we see a lot now in most of our rural communities, and even in the metros as well. Looking at the buyer's purchasing challenges. So what can people afford? We see that the median household income is around $51,000 in Iowa. If the rule of thumb for purchasing a new home is 2 to 2.5 times. If you get to 3 times your income, you're pushing your limits of being what's considered cost burden or being a challenge to pay for your mortgage. So looking at that budget of $104,000 to basically $30,000 is kind of the rule of thumb there. Again, with some subsidy or support, you can go beyond that, but it's really, again, one of those challenges we're looking at. The minimum for this home here we looked at, that would be $125,000 or $100,000 household income. So maybe a 2-home income with 2 workers, teacher and a police officer or something. But those are not always easy to come by. Again, and with this, we also look at how do we look at our in-commuters for our workforce as potential residents in our communities. So I'll talk about Marshalltown later, but I believe over 1/3 of their workforce actually commutes from outside of the county to the community just because of lack of available housing that's the right price point, as well as sometimes you have spouses that work maybe in Des Moines or in Ames or another community, and you decide that you're going to live in a different community so that you kind of have a midpoint. So there's just a lot of different factors that go into selecting where you live. Number 4 for those housing challenges is the physical and natural impediments or the availability of land. This is a picture of Manchester, Iowa. As you can see, the blue is kind of the floodplain and where we've experienced some flooding over the past decade. So those really limit where we can build within the community. And so looking at what are some other opportunities with infill as well as developments just on the edges of town where infrastructure is readily available. We also look at, again, with the infill with lots within the city limits, but those also present their own challenges, which I'll get to in a moment. And then lastly, blighted or abandoned homes. I know this home here is probably one that everyone can recognize in their small community. When I go to small towns, I'm assure them that this is not in their town. I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm sure they can see that this is one that is, you could just say, oh yeah, I know that house on First Street. But some of these homes present opportunities for renovation, redevelopment. But other ones, the best purpose or best use is to tear them down and present new opportunity for redevelopment for a new home. But some of the challenges lie in that is, what's around that home? What other homes are available in that neighborhood? And can you build a home that can appraise properly for the financing for that end buyer? That could be a challenge. And then also, what are your local codes? What are your local ordinances? You could have setbacks that can constrain your development. If you have some of these older neighborhoods, older platted parts of town, you have lots that are 50 to 60 foot wide, and building a conventional home with a 10-foot setback is really difficult or nearly impossible. So how do we match the code or look at other opportunities for placing homes in these blighted neighborhoods? So once we kind of go through those challenges in the communities, we kind of pinpoint what maybe 2 or 3 are really the biggest issues. And then we look at, what are some different development tools or strategies we can apply to that. And so I'm going to run through a handful of different tools that we can kind of possibly use in these communities. First and foremost is just, what does your development process look like in your rural community? Some communities really don't have a process. It's just kind of, you come in and you want to build something and you kind of have to go to the mayor or the clerk and just start having a conversation. Other communities, you have an actual process, but maybe it's not very well presented to the community. So as a builder, you come in and don't know where to go. So really making sure that you as a community or as a small town, you have that in place so so builders and investors know where to go and how to work through that process. Also, is your staff accommodating or combative? I've worked with a couple different communities where the staff is of the mindset they don't want to see their community grow, so they basically turn everyone away and they tell them they can't do it, which then infuriates their council or their city administrator or city clerk. So it's really trying to find and make sure that you have the right mix or the right attitude at your community level. What state and federal programs are out there? So being better aware of what those are. There are a lot of programs that you could look to help support development and redevelopment in communities. Of course, all of these have strings attached. All of these have hoops you have to jump through. That's kind of part of the reward of getting those funds. So we've worked with a couple communities on historic tax credits and USDA loans, so we kind of understand those programs, but some of the other ones are more the individual buyer or user of the home that would tap into those programs, but it's just really, again, being aware of what's out there. A revolving loan fund is something that's really probably people are more familiar with in a commercial or industrial development setting, but really what this does is it can provide a gap financing or kind of a help get to the end goal of development when maybe an appraisal doesn't work out. So creating that revolving loan fund locally with local dollars from the city, from county, from different employers is definitely a great tool to consider. Tax increment financing, or TIF, is one that I'm sure many of you are aware of how that works, but more or less what this does is you come in at the current base property value. You say for 10 years we're going to collect taxes on any increment or any additional value you bring to the property, and then we use those funds to fund improvements. Typically for residential, you can only use that for infrastructure build-out. So if you're doing a new subdivision, you can use it for roads, sewer, water, even design as well. So it's a little more limited for residential, but definitely another great tool. And then tax abatement is another tool that's pretty common for housing development. Basically, that freezes your property valuation for a certain period of time for that end buyer. So when you're using it for development, if you're using it for single-family development, it's really helpful for marketing the property, for getting the property sold. But if you're trying to get investors or builders in there, it may be better suited for multifamily or rental properties because they will see the primary benefit of that being that they are the owners and they're receiving that tax benefit. It makes them more willing to reduce their risk on their investment. But then again, you see communities like Adel who've really benefited from tax abatement to a point where they've had to stop it because they've had so much growth. And other communities in the Metro have also used this tool as well. Better promotion of existing incentives. This here is the same incentive, just presented in two different ways. This actually happened up in Manchester, Iowa, working with the city of Manchester, the town next door of Dyersville. Their website, the first thing you see is something like this, where it says, you get $7,000 if you move into our community. And that, as a person wanting to move to the town, like, how do I get that? How do I get that money? And it's really the same incentive, but just presenting it in a different way so that people understand what the value is of the regulation being, or the tool incentive being applied. So those are all the different tools and strategies we kind of deploy when we work with communities. The last thing I'm going to go through here are just some case studies or some examples of where we've applied these processes. And at the end here, I'm happy to take any questions or comments based on the case studies here. So the first one here is Marshalltown. We worked with them we started with them about 2 years ago in February. And our client there was actually the chamber in partnership with the city and other local partners. But really they had their main primary issue was they didn't have developable lots. They had lots that were vacant, but the lots that were for sale, there was maybe a handful throughout the community. So that's kind of the first step. We looked at a private developer coming in and building those lots out. Basically said there was really no money for them in it. It would just be kind of a challenge for them to even get a return or even cover their costs. So we looked at how do we put together a public-private partnership with the city and the chamber and a private developer to support a new development using residential TIF. And so we had a subdivision that was unfinished. Part of it being unfinished was part of its design. It wasn't conducive or didn't work due to some stormwater issues. So worked with our McClure's Land Development Services team to redesign that subdivision to where we were able to put in a 41 lot subdivision. And then we also, the city and the chamber put together a new home buyer incentive, $10,000 home buyer incentive. So if you buy a home that's valued at over $200,000 and you hit a couple other check marks on their list, you can get basically a check for $10,000 to move to their community.
So it's a good example of using the TIF that's going to help the developer, and then also the home buyer incentive to bring the buyers there too. Kind of using both of those tools at once to make sure you can get the project completed.
And one other thing that's important to understand about residential TIF is that there is a requirement that you set aside funds for a low to moderate income, or LMI funding. And so in Marshalltown, it's equivalent to what they consider their LMI population, which is 40%. So 40% of any tax increment for this development had to be set aside over the next 10 years for this fund. And so doing our calculations, that's somewhere around $600,000 that will go into this fund. And then those funds can be used anywhere in the community to support redevelopment or reinvestment in some of the existing neighborhoods. If you're familiar with Marshalltown, they were hit by a tornado 2 years ago. Derecho did a lot of damage as well. And so a lot of their older parts of the community have a lot of challenges in redevelopment. So these funds can go a long way to help supporting redevelopment of those neighborhoods and creating more workforce and affordable housing options within the community, while also building new homes that can be really marketable to new residents and bring in new population to the community. And as an update on this project, actually, we're going to complete, or the contractors are going to complete the infrastructure build out this spring, and then the lots will be, there's already some lots available for sale, but largely spring 2022 is when all the lots will be open, and hopefully get some homes start building next end of summer, fall time frame.
Do you have to have multiple builders involved in this, or do you typically find one builder that says, I'll do the whole division?
It depends. On this one in particular, we have good relationships with a local real estate realtor, and they have the relationship to builders, and so they're actually bringing the builders to the table, and they have 3 or 4 that they're working with. But I would say, depending on the scale, it's good to have more than one, but if one can take them down, it makes it easier, because you don't have multiple partners to try to figure out how to make that work. This is just the design of the subdivision. Originally, there was a parallel road that went in here. Unfortunately, there was some issues with stormwater runoff, and this is basically a hill right here, a very steep hill. And so we kind of changed the direction of the road. This road, jump back there. This will have opportunity to go further north to additional phases that are currently unplanned, but there's kind of been a bigger picture of what could be here in concept. But as this shows, we came in, reworked it, and then made it numbers work for the development to move forward.
This is a project that was already started. It's a good example of getting a project to a certain point, not realizing what tools you have to remove some of those obstacles for the developers, being able to work with that to get the infrastructure done and get the project completed.
Yeah. Another one is Wayne County, Iowa, and South Central Iowa. They have a manufacturer, East Penn, which manufactures batteries, commercial batteries, and so they have a expansion in the works right now. I believe they've already had their first 100 employee or openings for jobs, and I was told just this past week that they have another 200 jobs being offered the next month or two. So they're really already have a great need for housing down there, just from this alone. So actually, we have a couple different developers we're working with, but this one in particular is a multifamily 40-unit twin home development we're working with them on. It's meant to be non-income restricted, so it's workforce price point. So I believe the rents are going to be somewhere around $800 to $900 for a 3-bedroom, 1-bath unit, but not income restricted. So that basically means anybody can actually go into these units. You don't have to have below a certain price point. And we really worked with them on tax abatement for the community, as well as identifying available land in the community to site this development. We've also worked with the employers on putting together a down payment assistance for what comes next when you are rental to buy a home, to be more of a permanent resident, as well as helping them, again, market those developable lots. And as an update there, again, we're doing those, we're working with the developer on a 40-unit twin home development. We also have a new single-family subdivision that is being proposed and is in the works as a result of our study. The last example I have here is in Pella. So this is actually done with one of McClure's development partners, ATI Group, and they worked with Pella Corp directly on building out a new residential subdivision, or a mixed-use subdivision, rather. So they, again, have identified their needs for workforce housing in the community and trying to provide homes that are of a good quality and of a price point that meets the market. And so they worked with, again, as a P3 or a public-private partnership with the city and Pella and others, and the county especially, to put forth a TIF that would help support the infrastructure build-out. So actually, what's unique in this one is the county was able to front the funds to build the infrastructure, which was really pretty unique to build it out. So they actually have the infrastructure built out for the 160 acres, are currently working on their kind of the first phase of the first 100 or so lots for single family and townhome units. There's also, I have an image here. There's also here, which is a commercial component of it, is building out, I believe, these first 2 commercial lots. And then the next phase will be up here, which is kind of more workforce, single family, and then this is more commercial here, I believe, or maybe actually townhome apartments. And there's kind of a rendering of the overall development there, and it's called Prairie Ridge. And I guess lastly, I forgot I included Fort Dodge. This is the old mall site, if you're familiar at all with Fort Dodge. This site had been underperforming for the community for a number of years as far as the tax base goes. The commercial utility of the space was kind of at its lowest peak that it's seen. And so McClure and some of our development partners saw opportunity to come in and really approach the community and say, if we were able to put together a developer agreement to help support redevelopment of the site, we can come in and get this done. So we used TIF, again, on this site to provide upfront funds for demoing the property and preparing the site. And I believe currently there's already been some commercial, there's going to be a kind of a new medical clinic and a lot of commercial and mixed-use retail and residential as well on the site. I believe, and there's also going to be the, what's the name of the gaming?
Smash Park?
Smash Park, yeah. There's a Smash Park or a Smash Park type of business going to go in here as well as being an attraction to the new mixed-use mall. And that is the extent of our presentation. If there's any questions or comments, we're happy to take them now. Yeah. Yes. Oh, hold on.
Thank you. So 2 questions. One is, if you're looking at going into a community that's rural, what sort of studies do you want to do to make sure that you've got the employment in the area that is going to draw the people, so that you'll have people that can actually buy these homes and or fill up the apartments or whatever it is you're doing? What sort of studies are you guys doing so as an investor you're not a knucklehead for building something out that nobody's going to buy or live in?
First and foremost, we look at just doing a straight-up housing study and looking at the current demand based on natural population growth as well as those in-commuters. We see those that are commuting into the community as really one of the best opportunities to convert them to residents, and then also looking at what are their incomes currently for those folks and how does it match with the type of product we're looking at to bring to the market. Because a lot of times, to your point, the homes that you're going to build or the types of homes that maybe people say they want may not be attainable by most or by many. So we have to part of it is kind of bring some reality to the conversation and saying, how can we bring a product and bring a home that is attainable by those we want to move to the community, as well as, I think redevelopment and reinvestment is one of those solutions that I think people don't consider as much. There's not as much resources available aside from just traditional going to the bank and saying, I want to do a renovation. So how can we provide more opportunity for that?
And is that what your firm does?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Second question is give us an idea of what you see investors doing here. Do you find, you're putting together limited partnerships and guys are raising a couple $1 million and then providing the capital to do this stuff, or what do you see happening here if there's people in the room or online that are thinking about investing in these kinds of projects?
Yeah. So I think our role up to this point has really been trying to bring the opportunity and identify the value in the community. So the TIF in particular has been really helpful to say, if you as an investor are going to build out this subdivision, you're going to sell these lots at this conservative rate or this conservative price point, this is what you can see as your return. And so it's really trying to put together a pro forma in advance to help first that kind of primary investor who's going to lead kind of what you're looking at is bringing in equity partners to the table. But really we're kind of at that forefront of trying to identify the value in the community. Yeah.
And part of that, I mean, the housing study, as you mentioned, is a start to that. We've come into multiple communities where the housing study is done. You could go into a lot of communities and pretty much tell them before you even start, yes, you have a housing problem. The thing we try to do is take the next step. What does that mean? What obstacles do we need to get out of the way to get developers here? Developers are going to come here if there's money to be made in these deals. We just have to be able to work with the cities, get them on board to use some of those tools that they have to be able to make that worthwhile for developers to come to town.
Two questions. One, as a banker, I mean, monetizing the TIF can be complicated if the cities aren't guaranteeing them, basically. Have you had a lot of cities really hesitant to do that? Does that make it more complicated for the deal to go through?
I'll say yes. Where we've worked with Marshalltown in particular, and I guess the communities I shared, there was a developer agreement. It was all guaranteed by the city that they would pay up to X amount based on their returns on their taxes. So if the developer builds the subdivision, they build the homes, they get the homes built within the time frame, and they get that return. They're guaranteeing that they'll make that return. Otherwise, the developer is on the hook. And again, part of our role is really modeling that out. And I'm as conservative as possible with those build outs. In Marshalltown, I built it as a 6 to 7 units a year. And really, I think it's more realistic they could do double that. But really trying to be conservative. The price points were much lower than what I think today could be considered normal for a home of the caliber they're wanting to see in that subdivision. So I think again, it's on us at the forefront to really model that out, help both the investor and the bank understand what that return can be on a very conservative terms, and then again guaranteeing that through the city's their developer agreement.
My second agreement or question really was this opportunity zone. Have you seen more of that work for housing in these rural districts? They would probably meet the requirements, I'm guessing.
So I have not had much luck with opportunity zones, just period. Primarily for the rural communities is where we work, or for at least from my personal experience with the communities I work with, primarily from the standpoint that this is my take. My personal take is the opportunity zones. There's no differentiator between urban and rural. So if you're going to have an option to go in an urban area where you're going to see almost guaranteed returns, or if you're going to invest in a rural community that has, the same guidelines, same rules, same regulations, and see potential return, the returns that are maybe lower. I guess as an investor, you'd probably want to go to the urban area. And that's what I've seen with a lot of
And I just wondered, the opportunity zone might work because the TIF is a 10-year term.
Yep.
Opportunity zones, you're in for 10 years.
Yep.
you're looking for the tax write-off of the opportunity zone, so those investors already are more motivated by that. So, I mean, if you guys, McClure leads the front and puts together a fund, I would think you guys would go and make it work. So, anyway, just
No, I think
thinking out loud.
No, I think that's a good point. I think, I guess where I've been with the communities, it's just been a challenge up to this point. Just trying to get people to attract that investment to the rural areas. So, I'll give you my card. Yeah. That in lies the challenge in a lot of places is that availability of the trades. And so again, it comes to what can we do to attract those trades in the community, or how can we grow them locally, and it's more of a long-term strategy. But it's, again, looking at how does the community maybe provide additional funds to get them to the community? How do we guarantee returns for some of those investors and builders to say, if you're going to bring your trades here, we're going to guarantee you a return on this property that's similar to what you're getting in city X. And a lot of times, again, that's done by, on the developer side of things, having an open book and sharing what your expected returns are, and just being transparent. And that's, again, one of the trade-offs. Yeah, so.
Most of the stuff we saw here was Iowa-based.
It was, yep.
You guys were in Minnesota, throughout the Midwest?
We work without the Midwest. Primarily, McClure's footprint is Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas, but we definitely work kind of where the opportunity is. Oh, back here?
I think this is on.
It's on, yep.
One of the questions, worked on a few housing projects before, and one of the first things you guys note, you laid out was it's kind of that stop flow of money between the developer and the home buyers. So there's a lot of programs to fix that through the government. But from a development side, what do you guys do, when you are working with these communities to develop? One thing I always remember is when my wife and I bought our house in West Des Moines, when our neighbors moved in, they said they didn't want a 4,000, 5,000 square foot house out in Waukee. They wanted something, 2,000 square foot, but they couldn't get a builder to do that. So how do you guys work through those conversations with developers? Because the reality is, not every first-time home buyer, especially in rural Iowa, is going to be able to afford, even a $250,000 house. So how do you guys set those expectations going in, and then what are you doing to achieve those so they don't sit on the market for a long time?
Yeah, I would say partly that goes back into the knowing what financial tools are out there from the home buyer standpoint. USDA has a lot of great programs for first-time home buyers. Iowa Finance Authority has a lot of great programs for first-time home buyers. 3% down or even 0% down depending on your income. There's just a lot of great programs. So being aware of what is available to you and where you can utilize, what communities or what areas you can utilize them in. For our sake of these conversations, it's, those programs are primarily for rural communities. So, but there are other programs for urban areas as well. But that's where our role is, just making people aware of it and trying to help them, guide them through that process of awareness of those programs. Yes.
I'll piggyback on the point over here just about the contractors, and I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but just kind of thinking out loud.
Yep.
So I work with a lot of home builders in the Omaha market and try to help guys out in western Nebraska and whatnot, and with no issues getting lots developed whatsoever, but it's the trades. I mean, the profits in home building are here, and when your foundation guy doesn't want to come out west, nobody wants to come out west. I mean, the more we can have our brains together on how to take a good, reputable, big foundation company, framing company, plumbing company, and line them up a whole development and say, park your guys here for 2 months. I think that we start making some progress in that way, because the small town builders just they can't hit those budgets, particularly with how tight they are now.
Yeah. Yep. No, and that's we've seen that, and again, it's trying to think creatively. And I think that's a great idea of how do we kind of bring an army of trades for a short period of time to kind of get things started, and then maybe have finishing contractors locally that can do that work. But looking at different materials, different ways of construction, looking at, panelized panels, or I know, 3D printing is kind of the new fad right now, is how do we look at different tools and different means of construction to help bridge that gap. Yep.
I'm pushing this guy to put him on the spot, but he's basically a CFO of a major home builder in Omaha.
Okay.
And when we're talking about the prices, when you put those prices up on the screen as far as building a home for that kind of money,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to smoke him out here, but I would think he would say it would be impossible to build a house for that kind of money that you're talking about. If you have somebody on a $55,000 income and
Absolutely.
they can buy a $150,000 house or something like that,
Yep.
that's almost impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, except for multifamily stuff are really heavily subsidized.
Yes, and I will say this presentation is kind of looking at the big picture of not only new construction but redevelopment. And so, again, when we go into communities, again, to meet the market, a lot of the communities say we need homes priced at $100,000 to $180,000. And again, we know that new constructed homes you can't make that work unless you have substantial subsidy. It is bare bones, a home of nothing, no frills whatsoever, and that's even $200,000 probably. I know we worked. It's been a year ago now, so it's probably 20% more. But worked with a project in Southwest Iowa that a modular build. Cost all in, it was $190,000, and that was, again, everything was done as affordable as possible. Very nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, but that was $190 at cost. When you add on additional, realtor fees and other return on your investment as a developer, you're getting $240 when you get to that point. So, any other thoughts or questions, comments, or money to give me? Happy to take that as well.
Yeah, what are I'm a city council in Sac City.
Yeah.
What's the biggest, or the things that cities should be doing, that stand out in your mind that you don't see, small towns, to, let's say, from 500 to 3,000? What should we be doing that we're not doing? What are the things that you want to grab a hold and say, hey, you guys, why don't you start thinking of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to put forth one that you have available land, but that's not enough, because we've seen some communities. I think, is it Marne, Iowa, that had signs free land, had one taker in 10 years. So that's free land isn't enough. You have to also show that you have the market for buyers, that you have the need, the workforce. Workforce is a huge contributor towards housing. If you have a lot of jobs and a lot of job openings, that shows demand for housing to help get them to your community. Again,
Infrastructure is a big obstacle as well. Working with the developers, even if you do have the land, the cost of getting sewer, roads through there, that's what we see oftentimes kills the deal, unless you can find a way to use some tools and help finance that.
anyone else? Sure. I have a few more minutes here, so we'll be up front here if you have any more questions or comments you would like to share with us. And thank you guys very much.